My name is Ethan, and I live on my family's farm in rural Arkansas. Last summer, my parents decided to take a well-deserved vacation, leaving me responsible for taking care of the property. My two younger sisters, Emma and Lily, were also present, and together, we took on the daily farm routine. It was July, and the summer heat was almost suffocating, making the nights long and tiring. The farm is large, surrounded by seemingly endless cornfields. Our daily tasks included feeding the animals, checking the fences, and ensuring that the farm equipment was working correctly. The routine was exhausting, but the feeling of responsibility kept us motivated. During the day, the sun shone intensely, and the cicadas sang loudly, creating a constant symphony in the hot, heavy air. Our nights were usually quiet, spent watching TV in the living room or talking on the porch. On that particular night, Emma and I were watching a movie while Lily was in her room reading a book. The only light in the room came from the TV screen, which softly and intermittently illuminated the dark environment. The silence of the countryside around us was interrupted only by the occasional barking of the dogs patrolling the property. Everything seemed normal, and we were enjoying the typical calm of country life. While Emma and I were engrossed in the movie, the family dog started barking frantically. The barking was loud and insistent, clearly indicating that something was not right. Emma looked at me with concern, and I immediately got up to check what was happening. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out to the yard, where the dogs were gathered near the cornfield, growling and baring their teeth. I approached cautiously, trying to calm them down, but my efforts were futile. That's when I heard a strange sound, a human whistle coming from the middle of the cornfield. The sound was sharp and prolonged, which made me freeze for a moment. Who would be whistling in the middle of the night? Concerned about the possibility of an intruder, I ran back inside the house and grabbed the shotgun my father kept for emergencies. Emma, still visibly nervous, stood by Lily, who had now come out of her room and was looking out the window with alarm. I went back outside and, with a mix of fear and determination, fired a warning shot into the air. The sound of the shot echoed through the night, and the dog stopped barking momentarily. I waited a few seconds, trying to hear any movement, but everything went silent again. The tension in the air was palpable, and I struggled to control my breathing. I thought the situation was resolved, and the dogs began to calm down, so I went back inside, trying to reassure Emma and Lily. Back in the living room, I explained what had happened. Emma and Lily were clearly frightened but tried to remain calm. We attempted to return to normalcy, resuming the movie, but the feeling of unease lingered. About half an hour later, the dogs started barking again, this time with even more intensity. We knew something was definitely wrong. I went outside again, this time more prepared, with the flashlight in one hand and the shotgun in the other. The dogs were once more near the cornfield, and this time, as I illuminated the area with the flashlight, I saw the silhouette of a man standing among the cornstalks. The intruder was motionless, watching the house. My heart raced, and without hesitation, I pointed the flashlight directly at him. "Who's there?" I shouted, but in response the man turned and ran into the cornfield. I rushed back inside the house, locking the door behind me. I called my father, quickly explaining the situation. He advised me to fire another warning shot if the intruder returned and assured me that we would call the police if the situation worsened. With the shotgun in hand, I brought the dogs inside and tried to stay calm, knowing I needed to protect my sisters. Later that night, when we were finally beginning to settle down, I went to my room trying to relax after the scare. I lay in bed, but I couldn't stop thinking about the man I had seen. Who could he be? And what did he want on our property? My thoughts were interrupted by a sound that chilled me. Another whistle from outside. I quickly got up and went to the window. Looking out into the yard, I saw the intruder again, walking around our land as if searching for something. Adrenaline rushed through my body, and I grabbed the shotgun once more. I left the room and found Emma and Lily in the living room, their faces reflecting the same fear I felt. "He's back," I whispered, trying not to alarm them further. Determined to end the situation, I went to the front door and opened it slowly, keeping the shotgun ready. The intruder was closer this time, his footsteps audible on the dry grass and gravel of the yard. I shouted at him, but instead of responding, he just stopped and looked directly at me. Anger and fear mixed within me, and I fired a warning shot, this time closer to him. The man finally ran, disappearing into the cornfield. I slammed the door shut and returned inside, where Emma and Lily awaited me, wide-eyed. "I think I scared him this time," I said, trying to sound confident. "He won't be back." Despite my attempt to reassure them, the truth was that I wasn't sure. The incident left us all shaken and scared. We stayed awake the rest of the night, alert to any strange sounds. The daylight finally brought some relief, but also many unanswered questions. Who was the man? And what did he want? Why was he whistling and wandering around our property in the middle of the night? My name is Jake, and I work as a night restocker at a rural supermarket. My shift begins at 10 p.m., right after the store closes, and lasts until about 3 a.m. Normally, I'm accompanied by a colleague, and together we face the long night restocking the shelves and preparing the store for the next day. The supermarket is relatively small, but its isolated location in a rural area gives the night shift a unique and sometimes unsettling atmosphere. That particular night, upon arriving at work, I noticed my colleague wasn't there. His absence left me feeling uneasy, but I tried to stay calm and start my tasks. The silence in the empty supermarket was only interrupted by the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional sound of items being moved. I checked the break room and the entrance, but there was no sign of my colleague. The sense of isolation grew with every passing minute, turning the store, normally familiar, into a slightly more ominous place. I decided to call my colleague to find out what was going on. When he answered, his weak voice on the other end informed me that he was sick and couldn't make it to work that night. This heightened my concern, especially since I had already noticed that the back door was strangely shut, which was unusual. I tried to focus on work, rationalizing that the night would pass quickly if I kept a steady pace. However, the feeling of discomfort didn't go away. Every sound seemed amplified in the store's silence, and the idea of being alone in such a large place began to bother me more than I'd like to admit. As I worked, trying to keep my mind occupied and ward off the feeling of unease, I heard a loud sound coming from the other side of the store. It sounded like something had fallen or been knocked over. My heart raced, and with a flashlight in hand, I cautiously headed toward the noise. As I approached the dairy section, a chill ran down my spine. The store, which once seemed a familiar and safe space, now turned into a maze full of shadows and dark corners. Turning the corner, I saw a man dressed in black swiftly moving between the shelves. At first, I tried to rationalize, thinking it could be someone covering my colleague's shift. Maybe he hadn't informed me about the change, I thought, trying to calm myself. But a part of me knew something was wrong. The stranger was moving stealthily, almost as if he was hiding. I tried calling out to him, but my voice came out weaker than intended. "Hey, you there, who are you?" The man didn't respond, and mysteriously vanished behind the shelves. The unease turned into fear. I approached where he had disappeared, but found no one. The aisle was empty except for the perfectly organized dairy shelves. I returned to the front of the store, my heart pounding wildly, and picked up the phone to call my boss. I quickly explained the situation, my voice trembling with nerves. He suggested two options: try to remove the intruder myself or call the police. Knowing confronting the stranger could be dangerous, I opted for the second option. I dialed 911 and reported what was happening. The operator, sensing the urgency in my voice, advised me to leave the store and wait for the police to arrive. I followed the advice, leaving the store with hurried steps, feeling the weight of fear in every move. I got into my car and locked the doors, keeping my eyes fixed on the supermarket entrance. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, the silence of the night interrupted only by the distant sound of an occasional passing car. Finally, I saw the police car's lights approaching, and a feeling of relief mixed with anxiety washed over me. I knew the situation was far from resolved. When the officer arrived, I quickly explained the situation, still feeling adrenaline coursing through my veins. He reassured me, saying he would enter the store with me to investigate. I accompanied him back into the supermarket, feeling a bit safer but still apprehensive about what we might find. Entering the store, the sense of isolation and tension felt even more intense. The officer, with a flashlight in one hand and the other near his gun holster, moved carefully through the aisles. As we approached the dairy section, the sound of our footsteps echoed on the tile floor, and every shadow seemed to move out of the corner of my eye. I pointed to the aisle where I had last seen the man, and the officer nodded, indicating we should check there first. Suddenly, we heard a noise coming from the back of the store near the storage area. The officer signaled for me to stay put and advance toward the sound. I hid behind a shelf, my heart pounding hard. Time seemed to drag as I waited, seconds turning into minutes. Then I heard the officer's voice, firm and authoritative, saying, "Hands up. Turn around slowly." I moved toward the sound of the officer's voice and saw the man dressed in black standing there, obediently raising his hands. The intruder had a threatening smile on his face and deep eye bags that revealed a disturbing look. The officer quickly handcuffed him and began questioning him. The man calmly replied that he was just looking for a snack. His casual attitude and how he seemed unfazed by the seriousness of the situation left me even more unsettled. As the officer escorted him out of the store, I couldn't help but feel deeply disturbed. The police recorded the incident and the man was taken away. The officer assured me he would stay around until the end of my shift to ensure everything was safe. His presence brought some comfort, but the experience had left an indelible mark. My name is Mike, and I work as a night shift stalker at a gas station on the outskirts of the city. I took this job to earn some extra money while finishing my studies. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 4 a.m., and the routine was generally quiet, though solitary. I spent most of the night organizing shelves, checking inventory, and attending to the few customers who appeared in the early hours of the morning. The gas station was in a relatively isolated area, surrounded by a few closed shops and an almost always empty parking lot. The fluorescent lights of the station illuminated the environment intermittently, creating shadows that danced around. The silence was broken only by the occasional sound of a car passing on the road or the hum of the vending machines. After a few months of work, I started noticing a man who frequented the station almost every night around 2 a.m. He was tall, with disheveled hair and a disturbed look. He always bought a beer and left quickly without saying much. One night, while organizing the shelves, this man walked into the store. He seemed more disturbed than usual, with bloodshot eyes and disheveled clothes. He approached the counter and in a low, hoarse voice asked my name. "It's Mike," I replied, trying to stay calm. He smiled in a strange way and said, "I'm Tom. Nice to meet you, Mike." The way he pronounced my name made me shiver. From that night on, Tom began to frequent the gas station regularly, always around 2 a.m. His presence became increasingly unsettling. He would buy a beer, sometimes 2 or 3 items, and always call me by name. "Good evening, Mike. How are you?" he would ask, with a smile that never reached his eyes. I responded politely, but the unease grew with each encounter. As the weeks went by, Tom's behavior began to worry me more. He stayed longer in the store, wandering through the aisles without buying anything and watching me from a distance. Sometimes he talked to himself, murmuring things I couldn't understand. His disturbed look and nervous gestures made me question what he really wanted there. Nevertheless, I continued to work normally, trying not to let my apprehension show. The situation seemed under control, but Tom's regular presence created an atmosphere of discomfort. Every time he entered the store, my stomach turned, and I stayed alert, waiting for something unexpected. It was as if a dark cloud hung over those early mornings, and I couldn't predict when or if it would dissipate. It was a stormy night, with thunder rumbling and torrential rain beating against the gas station windows. The clock read just after 2 a.m. when Tom entered the store, drenched and visibly disturbed. His clothes were soaked, and his disheveled hair dripped water onto the floor. The look in his eyes was different this time. He seemed desperate and out of his mind. He quickly approached the counter and in a trembling voice said, "Mike, I did something really bad. I need to hide." My heart raced and adrenaline surged through my body. I tried to stay calm and asked, "What happened, Tom?" But he didn't respond. Instead, he ran toward the restroom hallway, disappearing quickly. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what he had said. The tension in the air was palpable, and fear began to take hold of me. Suddenly, the gas station lights went out, plunging the store into complete darkness. The sound of the storm outside seemed even louder and more threatening. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. I walked slowly toward the restroom hallway, trying to control my accelerated breathing. As I approached, I heard strange noises and the constant sound of dripping. "Tom, are you there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. My fear grew with each step, and the shadows created by the flashlight seemed to move menacingly. When I reached the restroom doors, I saw that they were ajar. I pushed the door slowly, hoping to find Tom inside. When I entered, the restroom was empty. I looked around, illuminating every corner with the flashlight, but there was no sign of Tom. The dripping sound continued, coming from one of the sinks. Suddenly, I heard quick footsteps behind me, and I turned around, shining the light down the hallway. Tom emerged from the shadows, running toward me and shouting that he was going to kill me. I felt overwhelming panic, but I managed to break free and run toward the store's exit, my heart pounding wildly. Panic consumed me as I ran out of the store, gasping and heart racing. I barely had time to lock the door behind me before sprinting toward my car, parked near the gas pumps. My hands shook as I tried to get my phone from my pocket, finally managing to call the police. "I need help now. There's a man here. He tried to attack me." The words came out broken by my heavy breathing. While waiting for the police to arrive, I stayed locked in the car, keeping my eyes fixed on the store entrance. Every thunderclap seemed to intensify my sense of impending danger. Time seemed to drag on, each second prolonging my terror. Finally, I saw the lights of a police car approaching, and a feeling of relief mixed with anxiety washed over me. The police officers quickly got out of the car and headed toward the store. One of the officers tapped on my car window, and I explained the situation as quickly as I could. "He's inside. He said he did something bad and then tried to attack me," I said, pointing to the store. The officers, with flashlights in hand, cautiously entered the darkened store. I stayed outside, trembling with fear and concern. A few minutes later, I saw the officers coming out, bringing Tom handcuffed. He was standing acting strangely, mumbling incoherent words and shaking his head. When he passed by me, he gave me a threatening smile, licking his lips in a disturbing way. "I was just playing with Mike," he said, his voice filled with a madness that made my skin crawl. As Tom was placed in the police car, the officers assured me that he would be taken to the station and that I would be safe. I thanked them, still trying to process everything that had happened. The adrenaline finally began to subside, leaving me exhausted and shaken. I went back inside the store to close up and lock everything, making sure all doors were securely shut. In the days that followed, the experience wouldn't leave my mind. Tom's disturbing look and his threatening words haunted my thoughts. I decided never to leave the doors open during my shift again, reinforcing security to prevent any similar incident. That stormy night completely changed my perspective on night work, and the memory of Tom became a constant reminder of the fragility of personal safety. Years ago, my friends and I decided to do something reckless to pass the time in our hometown of New Jersey. We were young, full of energy, and always seeking thrills. That night, we decided to bring a Ouija board to an abandoned church that sat atop a steep road, surrounded by dense forests. The church had been broken into several times before and was in a state of total disrepair, making it the perfect spot for our nighttime adventure. We parked the car at the beginning of the trail leading up to the church. With flashlights in hand, we began the walk down the dark, winding path. The sound of dry leaves under our feet and the rustling of trees in the wind created a sinister atmosphere, but we were determined to move forward. When we finally reached the church, the sight of the imposing and desolate building, with its broken windows and weathered doors, increased our excitement and a little bit of our fear. We entered the church, opening the heavy door with some effort. The interior was in ruins, with broken pews scattered on the floor and cobwebs covering the dark corners. After ensuring we were alone, one of us set up the Ouija board on the floor in front of the altar. We lit 3 candles around the board and turned off the flashlights to create an even more sinister atmosphere. Sitting in a circle, we started asking the typical Ouija board questions, eager to see what would happen. At first, the questions were innocent and cliché. Is anyone here with us? Who wants to talk to us? To our surprise, the planchette began to move slowly. We laughed, believing one of us was playing a trick. Each of us swore that we weren't moving the planchette, but skepticism and laughter continued. However, as the planchette moved from letter to letter, forming disconnected words, a feeling of unease began to spread through the group. Suddenly, a loud and sharp sound echoed through the church, coming from the altar. It sounded as if a large piece of wood had cracked. We all froze, our flashlights pointed at the altar, but we didn't see anyone. The silence that followed was oppressive, and fear began to creep into our fun. We tried to calm ourselves, rationalizing that it could just be the old building settling. We decided to continue with the session, although we were clearly more nervous. Each of us was on alert for any sound or movement. The environment, which once seemed merely abandoned, now felt threatening. We continued asking questions, but now with trembling voices and furtive glances. The tension in the air was palpable, and our courage was beginning to wane. We asked the Ouija board again, "Who is here with us?" The planchette began to move, this time faster and more confidently. It spelled out the word, "Watch." We tried to laugh it off, but our laughter was forced and tense. The idea that we might not be alone was becoming harder to ignore. While we tried to understand the meaning of the word, another disturbing sound echoed through the church. This time it sounded like something had been knocked over in the back of the hall. We turned our flashlights in the direction of the sound, but again, we saw nothing. The feeling of being watched intensified, and our nerves were on edge. Still, we tried to continue. We asked, "Do you want to harm us?" The planchette quickly moved to no, but the answer was not exactly comforting. The tension in the air was palpable, and we were torn between morbid curiosity and the desire to get out of there as quickly as possible. Then, the sound of something falling interrupted the silence again. A stone the size of a golf ball fell directly onto the Ouija board, making us jump in fright. Our hearts raced, and panic set in. Not knowing how the stone appeared there and not wanting to find out, we all got up and ran out of the church. The candles were left behind, flickering in the darkness as we abandoned the board and fled to the safety of the outside. As we reached the car, our hearts were still pounding. We quickly got in and locked the doors, trying to catch our breath and understand what had just happened. Fear and adrenaline pulsed through our veins, and we exchanged nervous glances as we discussed what we should do next. One of us suggested simply leaving and forgetting about it, but we knew that this experience would be etched in our minds forever. As we drove back to one of the friends' houses, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Jake, being the most religious and superstitious of the group, was convinced that we had contacted a spirit. "This is a clear sign that we shouldn't have messed with that," he said, staring intently at the road ahead. Mark, on the other hand, believed that there might have been someone else in the church, which was also a frightening possibility. When we finally arrived at Mark's house, we gathered in the living room, still trembling with fear. We decided that despite our different viewpoints, it was best not to return to that church. However, curiosity got the better of us the next day. Jake and I went back to the church to retrieve the Ouija board, more for a sense of closure than bravery. Upon arriving at the church, the atmosphere seemed even more sinister in the daylight. The same candles we had left behind were still there, but extinguished, as if someone had blown them out right after we had run off. But the Ouija board had disappeared. We searched around, trying to find some explanation, but there was no sign of it. That mystery, coupled with the events of the previous night, left us even more unsettled. We returned to Mark's house, without the board, but with a story we would never forget. The experience in the abandoned church became one of the scariest episodes of our lives, a constant reminder that some things are better left alone. We decided never to mess with the unknown again, reinforcing our respect for the inexplicable and promising never to involve ourselves in something so reckless again. When my dad mentioned that his friend Jennifer had an apartment available for subletting, I didn't think twice. She was offering a good deal, and in Seattle that was hard to find. The apartment was in Capitol Hill, a lively and vibrant neighborhood. But there was one detail. I would have to share the place with a 60-year-old woman named Grace, whom Jennifer had recently met. I decided to accept, even with some hesitation. On the day of the move, Jennifer greeted me with a smile and introduced me to Grace. She seemed like a calm lady, with gray hair and a serene expression. The apartment, in an old building, had a somewhat vintage feel. It was already fully furnished, which was great because I only brought my bed and dresser. My room was small but cozy, with a window overlooking the bustling Pine Street. The living room had antique furniture, and the kitchen, though compact, seemed practical. Jennifer assured me that Grace was great company, and I wanted to believe her. I was ready to start this new chapter of my life. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of pots and pans in the kitchen. Still groggy, I got up and went there. Grace was making breakfast, looking tranquil, as if nothing had happened the previous night. I sat at the table, trying to appear casual, but the memory of the previous night wouldn't leave me. "Good morning, Grace," I said, trying not to sound suspicious. "Good morning," she replied with a smile. "Did you sleep well?" I hesitated for a moment, deciding whether or not to mention what had happened. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "Grace, last night, you were in the hallway making strange sounds. It was kind of scary." She stopped fiddling with the pans and looked at me with a confused expression. "Strange sounds? I don't remember anything like that. It must have been a dream, dear." Her response made me even more uneasy. "I'm sure it wasn't a dream. I saw you there, and the sounds you were making were very real." Grace seemed genuinely perplexed. "I really don't know what you're talking about. Maybe it was some kind of episode, but I don't remember anything like that." The conversation left me even more confused and worried. Was Grace having some kind of psychotic episode? The thought that I might be living with someone potentially dangerous began to haunt me. I tried to finish breakfast and go about my day, but that feeling of discomfort wouldn't leave. Later that night, after a long and stressful day, I was ready to rest. I lay in bed, trying to relax, but the unease from the night before still hung over me. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the disturbing thoughts when I heard a sound coming from the hallway. There was a knock on my bedroom door, followed by the same moaning and murmuring sounds I had heard the previous night. My heart began to race, and I sat up in bed, trying to listen more closely. The knocking and murmurs continued for a minute, each sound more unsettling than the last. "Grace?" I called, my voice trembling slightly. There was no answer, just the sounds continuing as if she was right on the other side of the door. I stood up, hesitant, and walked to the door. It wasn't locked, and the thought of opening it terrified me, but I needed to know what was happening. I touched the doorknob, but then the sounds began to move away. I waited a few seconds before slowly opening the door. The hallway was empty, the dim light casting shadows that seemed to move. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart, and closed the door again. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. The discomfort of knowing my bedroom door didn't have a lock made me even more anxious. I was beginning to regret agreeing to live there. Sleep came in fragments, and every night noise seemed amplified, keeping me in a constant state of alertness. That same night, I was suddenly awakened at 1:30 in the morning by a sharp sound, like the creak of wooden floorboards. I felt a chill run down my spine as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. It was then that I saw her. Grace was standing next to my bed, holding a knife in her hand, her eyes fixed on me and making those same strange, low sounds. My heart nearly stopped. The scene was surreal, like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I screamed, my cry echoing through the room as I recoiled, expecting to be attacked. But Grace just stood there, staring at me with a vacant, disturbing expression. Suddenly, she turned and left the room, her footsteps making the floor creak with each movement. It took a moment for me to regain control of my body. Trembling, I got up and pushed my dresser against the door, blocking it as best I could. I spent the rest of the night awake, sitting in the corner of the room, watching the door. Every sound, every shadow seemed like a threat. The clock seemed to drag, each minute an eternity. I didn't know what to do. Thoughts about Grace's mental health mingled with the real and palpable fear I felt. I was trapped in a constant state of vigilance, unable to relax or sleep. When the sun finally began to rise, the morning light brought a modicum of relief, but I knew I needed help. The next morning, as soon as the sun was fully visible, I picked up the phone and called Jennifer. I explained what had happened, trying not to sound completely terrified, but the urgency in my voice was undeniable. "Jennifer, you need to come here right now," I said, my voice trembling. "Grace was in my room last night with a knife. I don't know what to do." Jennifer arrived at the apartment in less than an hour, with a look of concern and disbelief. We entered the apartment together and found Grace in the kitchen, making coffee as if nothing had happened. Her tranquility was unsettling. "Grace, we need to talk," Jennifer began, trying to sound calm. "What happened last night? Why were you in his room?" Grace interrupted with a confused expression. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was sleeping all night. I don't remember anything." Jennifer and I exchanged glances. The situation was becoming increasingly bizarre. "She was there, Jennifer," I insisted, with a knife in her hand. I heard the sound she was making. It was real." Jennifer sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Grace, this is very serious. You might be having some kind of problem. We're going to get help, but in the meantime, we need to make sure everyone is safe." It became clear that Jennifer couldn't immediately evict Grace due to the legal process. The thought of spending another night there was unbearable, but Jennifer promised to take action quickly. Grace apologized again, insisting she didn't remember anything. After that tense morning conversation, Jennifer suggested I find another place to stay while she dealt with Grace's situation. The idea of leaving that apartment was a relief, so I began looking for a new place immediately. In the days that followed, Jennifer did some research and spoke with specialists. We found out that Grace likely suffered from sundown syndrome, a condition that causes confusion and aggression in elderly people during the late afternoon and night. It was a plausible explanation, but it didn't lessen the fear I felt. Finally, I managed to find a new apartment and moved out as quickly as possible. While packing my things, Jennifer assured me she was taking the necessary steps to care for Grace and ensure she received the help she needed. Even so, the experience left me shaken. Just remembering the nights I spent in that apartment made me shiver. I knew I was safe now, but the memories of those strange sounds and the image of Grace standing beside my bed with a knife would never leave me. My name is Mike, and during my teenage years and early 20s, I used to take a lot of night trips with my friends. We loved the freedom and sense of adventure that driving at odd hours gave us. The empty roads and feeling of being alone in the world added to the allure of these nighttime escapades. It was a time of discovery and new experiences, where each outing became a little adventure. On one of those nights, around 4 a.m, I was driving a friend home after a long night of talking and laughing. The city was asleep, and the deserted streets were lit only by the flickering streetlights. The tranquility of the hour was almost hypnotizing, and the silence was broken only by the constant hum of the car's engine and some music playing softly on the radio. After dropping my friend off at his house, I decided to stop at a gas station to fill up. The station was deserted, except for a short man in a hoodie standing outside near the pumps. When I got out of the car to refuel, the man stared at me without saying a word. There was something unsettling about his gaze, but I ignored the feeling of unease, put the nozzle into the tank, and walked into the building to pay. As I walked into the gas station to pay for the fuel, the discomfort caused by the hooded man lingered in my mind. The station's interior was silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights that created a cold, unwelcoming glow. At the counter, I found an elderly attendant who seemed unaware of my nervousness. I paid for the fuel and on impulse, decided to buy a lottery ticket. trying to keep up the routine so as not to appear scared. The attendant handed me the ticket with a friendly smile, but the silent, threatening presence of the man outside would not leave my mind. While waiting for my change, I looked out the station window, but did not see the hooded man anymore. The initial relief was quickly replaced by a growing sense of discomfort. Had he left? Or was he just hiding in the shadows, waiting to surprise me? The uncertainty left me even more tense. I took my change, thanked the attendant, and headed quickly for the exit, feeling a shiver run down my spine. As I walked out of the building and back to the car, I looked around trying to detect any suspicious movement. The area was deserted, and the rain began to fall softly, creating an even more sinister atmosphere. I quickened my pace, feeling each raindrop as a harbinger of something bad. I got into the vehicle and locked the doors immediately, letting out a sigh of relief as I started the engine. As I began to drive home, I tried to shake off the feeling of discomfort that had settled in. The relief of being back on familiar roads helped me relax a bit, but the strange encounter at the gas station continued to linger in my mind. The image of the hooded man, with his fixed, threatening stare, was hard to forget. I turned on the radio to try to distract my thoughts, but the music seemed incapable of silencing the unease I felt. The road ahead was dark and lonely, and I couldn't help but look in the rearview mirror now and then, making sure no one was following me. While driving down the deserted road, I used the sound of the radio to try to calm myself. However, in the middle of the drive, I heard a strange noise coming from the back seat. My heart raced, and I instinctively looked in the rearview mirror. To my horror, I saw the hooded man from the gas station. He was sitting in the back seat, staring at me with cold, penetrating eyes. Terrified, I screamed and slammed on the brakes, causing the car to stop in the middle of the road. "Get out of my car!" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. The man said nothing, but his threatening gaze didn't leave me. I felt a chill run down my spine and, without thinking twice, began to scream for help, hoping someone in the nearby houses could hear me. Some house lights came on, and soon several people came out to see what was happening. The intruder opened the car door and slowly got out. Before disappearing into the darkness, he turned and said in a threatening voice, "I could have slit your throat." His words froze me for a moment, and then he disappeared into the night. The people who came out of their houses approached, asking if I was okay. Trembling, I briefly explained the situation, grateful for the help. Still in shock, I got back in the car and continued driving home, making sure the intruder was nowhere nearby. The experience left me deeply shaken, and I never forgot the hooded man's disturbing gaze. Since that night, I always check the back seat before getting into the car and avoid stopping at gas stations during the early hours. That incident remains the scariest experience of my life. In the 60s, when I was 8 or 9 years old, I used to accompany my father every morning to the school where he taught, in the suburbs of Atlanta. We woke up before dawn, my father would make strong coffee, and I would eat a quick cereal before we left. Those cold, dark mornings were peaceful, just the two of us, and the sound of the car engine as we drove through the deserted streets. Our first stop was often a small independent gas station to fill up the tank. The station was located on a quiet corner of the city, and we were usually the first customers of the day. The place had a welcoming atmosphere, with a small office and a full-service area where an attendant took care of the refueling and cleaned the car windows. I enjoyed watching the attendant work. It was like watching a small morning performance. That routine was almost a daily ritual. We would arrive at the station before dawn, and the attendant, who already knew us, would always greet us with a friendly wave. While my father chatted briefly with him, I would sit in the car, watching the station lights illuminate the darkness around us. It was a moment of calm before the hectic start of the school day. One morning, as we arrived at the station before dawn, we noticed the place was deserted. There was no sign of the attendant, neither in the booth nor anywhere else. The silence at the gas station, usually so welcoming, now felt strange and unsettling. My father honked several times, hoping the attendant would appear, but no one came. "Maybe he's in the bathroom?" I suggested, trying to find an explanation for the unusual absence. My father looked around, concerned, and then honked again. We waited for a few minutes, but the station remained empty. The absence of other cars reinforced the sense of isolation and strangeness. My father got out of the car and went to the booth, looking through the windows and calling for the attendant, but he received no response. He returned to the car with a serious expression on his face, clearly bothered by the situation. While we waited, I started to feel more and more uneasy. The darkness around us seemed denser, and the silence heavier. The gas station, which had always been a safe and familiar stop, now felt threatening. Maybe we should wait a little longer, I suggested again, but my father shook his head. I also needed to use the bathroom and asked my father to let me go, but he thought it best to head to another station. "We can't be late. Let's go to another station, and you can use the bathroom there," he said, trying to reassure me with a forced smile. Before leaving, I looked once more at the empty booth and the deserted station. There was something deeply disturbing about the attendant's absence. As we drove away, I kept looking back, with a growing sense of unease inside me. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the deserted road reflecting the grim mood of the morning. My father was clearly trying to stay calm, but I could see he was worried too. We arrived at another gas station a few miles away, where we were finally able to refuel the car and I could use the bathroom. The normality of the other station helped to dispel some of the tension, but the feeling that something was wrong at the first gas station did not leave me completely. We continued on our way to school, but that morning would be marked as a turning point, where the familiar routine broke and gave way to an uneasiness that I still couldn't fully understand. A few days after that strange morning, my father was sitting at the kitchen table reading the local newspaper as usual. Suddenly he went pale and muttered something inaudible. Curious, I approached and saw the headline that had disturbed him. "Gas station attendant found dead in bathroom." My heart raced as I recognized the gas station we visited every morning. The news detailed that the attendant's body had been found in the men's bathroom, stabbed to death. The motive seemed to be robbery, as all the money and coins from the station were missing. The amount of money stolen wasn't much, considering the early morning hours, but that didn't stop the killer from committing such a brutal crime. I felt a chill at the thought that we had been so close to that horrific scene. As my father continued reading, my mind went back to that morning. I remembered how I had asked to use the bathroom and how my father had decided it was better to go to another station. What if I had insisted on going to the bathroom that day? What if we had found the attendant's body? The mere thought made me shiver. We could have encountered the killer, or been witnesses to something even more terrible. The reflection on what could have happened became a constant shadow in my thoughts. I felt relieved that we had left, but I also couldn't stop thinking about how lucky we were. From that day on, the morning routine was never the same again. The gas station, which had been just an ordinary stop, was now shrouded in an aura of fear and mystery. My father and I never went back there, preferring other stations, and the memory of that event became a dark reminder that would accompany us forever. My name is Alexia, I'm 25, and I work as a sales representative, which requires me to take long road trips from North to South Texas. Due to my work schedule, many of these trips happen late at night, when the roads are empty and the silence is almost absolute. To stay awake, I make frequent stops at gas stations to get coffee. My routine is simple. I stop at a station, fill up the car, grab a strong coffee, and sometimes a chocolate bar to help fight fatigue. These gas stations, with their fluorescent lights and the soft sound of ambient music, have become a kind of nighttime refuge for me. The quick chats with the attendants and the moments of pause are enough to recharge my energy before hitting the road again. On these stops, I always follow the same ritual. I enter the store, get my coffee, and pay for the fuel. It's a familiar and almost comforting process, a small break in the solitude of night travels. However, on one of these nights, a stop that should have been routine turned into a disturbing experience that I will never forget. On one of those nights, during yet another long night drive, I stopped at a gas station that looked like all the others I had been to. The store's fluorescent light shone brightly against the night's darkness, creating an almost surreal contrast. I entered the store to pay for the fuel and grab a coffee when I noticed a strange man leaning against the wall near the entrance. He was of medium height, wearing dirty and disheveled clothes, and had a restless look. As soon as I entered, I had the impression he started following me. He tried to start a conversation, but his approach was uncomfortable and invasive. Suddenly, he approached me and asked, "Are you traveling alone?" in a tone that sent a chill down my spine. I ignored the question, grabbed my coffee, and headed to the cashier. While I was paying for the fuel and coffee, the man continued to follow me closely. His proximity was unsettling, and he began asking even more personal and disturbing questions. "Is that blouse new? Where did you buy it? Where are you going?" His persistence made me increasingly nervous. I stayed calm as much as possible, answered his questions dryly without showing interest in the conversation, paid quickly, and left the store, hoping he would lose interest. As I left, I noticed the man had followed me outside. He then stopped on the other side of the gas pump and kept staring at me intently. A shiver ran up my spine as he continued to glare at me. "Are you alone?" he asked again, but now with an even more threatening tone. The tension increased, and I knew I needed to think quickly. Lying, I said that my boyfriend was in the car, and to protect myself, I discreetly grabbed the pepper spray I always carried with me. The man didn't seem to believe it, but hesitated for a moment. "Is he really?" he muttered, stepping forward. When he began to approach, I pointed the pepper spray in his direction. The man backed away, laughing sinisterly, but didn't try to get any closer. My heart was racing, and adrenaline was coursing through my body. I finished filling up the tank as quickly as possible, always keeping an eye on the man, who continued to watch me with that unsettling smile. I knew I needed to get the change in the store, but the idea of leaving the car and passing by him again made me apprehensive. Keeping the pepper spray firmly in hand, I looked around, trying to plan my entry and exit quickly. I took a deep breath and entered the store, trying to appear calm. At the cashier, the attendant handed me the change, and I thanked her quickly, feeling the urgency weigh on every second. As I left the store, I looked around and noticed the man was no longer on the other side of the gas pump. My heart raced again, and I began to imagine where he might be. Was he hiding, waiting to attack me? With the pepper spray ready, I walked quickly toward the car, my eyes scanning the surrounding area. The feeling of vulnerability was overwhelming, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Suddenly, a pickup truck pulled into the parking lot, and I saw an opportunity to ask for help. I waved desperately at the driver, who stopped beside me. "Please, can you help me? There's a strange man following me," I explained, my voice trembling with fear. The driver, a burly man with a serious expression, nodded and got out of the truck, accompanying me to the car. Together, we began to search for the strange man. To our relief and horror, we found the man hiding behind my car, lurking like a predator waiting for its prey. When he realized he had been discovered, he ran off into the darkness, disappearing quickly. I deeply thanked the driver for his help, feeling a wave of relief mixed with residual fear. I quickly got into the car, locking the doors, and left the gas station as fast as I could. Continuing my journey, the disturbing experience left me uneasy and certain that the man was waiting to attack me as soon as I unlocked the car doors. The memory of that sinister smile and unsettling questions remained etched in my mind, and I decided that from then on, I would be even more cautious during my nighttime stops.